Welcome to ESRAG Podcast, your trusted source for exploring environmental solutions see through the lens of environmental and sustainability Rotary Action Group. Each episode brings you innovative ideas, impactful projects, and inspiring stories from experts and Rotarians who are committed to building a greener future. Whether you're a passionate advocate or just starting a journey, our podcast is here to inform, motivate, and connect you with global movement with environmental stewardship. In this episode, we welcome Dr. Meenakshi Venkataraman, an accomplished ecologist from India and a chair of projects at ESRAG. With background in predator-prey dynamics and infectious disease research, she transitioned into community engagement, focusing on training marginal farmers in sustainable farming practices. Dr. Venkataraman is also a published author and is currently spearheading efforts to get Rotarians involved in impactful environmental project reporting, offering analytical insights on the work done to protect our planet. My name is Admiral. I welcome you to our podcast. And as usually with me, there's Felix.
Yes, another day on land. It's good to be here. Our guest definitely is going to be quite intriguing to listen to. She has so much experience in the environment space. She's extremely passionate about the environment. And this is going to be one of those episodes that you want to keep listening to and you want to come back and listen to it again.
So, Felix, how have you been? How has been your week?
The week has been quite interesting on this side of the continent, or rather on this side of the land. I saw there was one innovation that I found intriguing from Senegal. Somebody came up with pavements that you can step on and they generate electricity. This is a community in Senegal where a big percentage of the population does not have the last mile connectivity. So a young student was able to come up with an innovation whereby you step on the blocks through the vibrations and the physics, it creates electricity, then which is then transmitted to the bulbs. I found that to be quite intriguing.
Let's say we can put it around the Olympic Stadium when people run around. People can just generate electricity.
Exactly, for the entire city. All you have to do is just step on it. That's it. That's all you have to do. So the higher the traffic, the more energy is generated, which I think is some form of green energy, looking at it.
Is it like a prototype or how I need to see this? Is it just a new invention?
Yes, this is something he came up with, and the reason he was able to come up with such an innovation, or he saw the need for it in the community, because setting up electric lines is expensive for the government. And so majority of the population don't have electricity. And so he sat down, thought about it, and applied the knowledge he had learned in school on how he can be able to have electricity generated through the steps, people stepping on a block. And that's the bottom line, which means a whole city can be pretty much get the electricity by how much traffic is flowing into the city.
Well, that's an interesting thing to follow, Felix. Let's kind of follow and see where it goes. What I read recently, a couple of news about the jungle in various countries. First of all, Indonesia is building a new capital. The current capital is sinking. First of all, due climate change, and secondly, also to how the city was built and planned. So they're building a whole new capital. But to do that, they're removing a lot of ecological sites. And one of the things that they're removing in the current area, they're removing a lot of wildlife mangroves. If you read about it, it's a bit ironic that they're removing mangroves because mangroves, time and time again, proved in study, they help the city against floodings, to sustain the city. And here we have officials removing wildlife mangroves that have grown there for thousands of years to build a new capital because the old capital is sinking and is in danger of being flooded. I think most of the news we read about is kind of ironic anyway, but this is something that I read and I was like, do people even consult with ecological people about this, geologists, ecologists? Because it seems like in 100 years, you're going to start also build a new capital because this one will be sinking.
This is quite interesting. And I'm sure our guest tonight will have something also to point out on that, especially on the aspect of biodiversity being destroyed. And even as the world is trying to pretty much address biodiversity loss, I find that to be kind of counterproductive. Why would you destroy a whole ecosystem just to put up a new city? They could have found a way to be able to integrate the new city into the existing land and make sure they preserve the biodiversity, because both can exist. I think, as you mentioned, there should be some kind of international, maybe law, maybe policies governing such kind of development. Because I'm sure even as they build that city and they destroy the biodiversity, much of the funding, I'm sure, is not just local funding. It's quite thought provoking as to why they'll do that, yet come back again and try and find a way, a solution to return the biodiversity that they destroyed. So that's counterproductive. I think so. As you said, some of the things that are being done, when you think about it, it's a question of the nationally determined contribution, the national action plans, the 2030 SDGs we are looking at, goals, the 2050 carbon neutrality. I think a lot needs to be done in terms of engaging governments at the local level towards pretty much advising on ways. As much as maybe international bodies might not have so much strength in forcing cities to be able or forcing governments, but I'm sure in their funding, there's a clause that can be put in place towards ensuring that there's preservation and conservation of biodiversity.
Yeah, they keep saying now that 65% of this new city will include tropical wildlife, but I'm really have a hard time to see that 65% of your city will have tropical wildlife. I don't know if people would like to live like that or that's just utopia. They're planning to cut 3,000 hectares of mangrove trees, which will be cut starting next year towards the end of next year. Then you say you still want to save 65% of your tropical wildlife.
It doesn't make sense whatsoever. And even reason as to why it doesn't make sense also, it's because if you look at in terms of how much carbon is sequestered by mangrove, that's we're looking at 10 times more than a normal tree. So cutting that number of mangroves, you can imagine how much more carbon is being emitted and how much prevention mechanisms are being destroyed. As you said, it really doesn't make much sense when you think about it. But let's see what the international body has to say about it.
Our guest today is Dr. Meenakshi Venkataraman, Chair of Projects at ESRAG and esteemed ecologist from India. Dr. Venkataraman has a rich academic background in predator and prey interactions in infectious disease research. After transitioning from academia, she became deeply involved in community engagement, training marginal farmers in sustainable practices. She also has been a strong advocate for citizen science and environmental education, serving as secretary of Nilgiri Natural History Society, a published author and Rotary leader, and enhancing project impact reporting within Rotary's environmental initiatives to showcase the collective impact of Rotarians in safeguarding our planet. Welcome, Mina.
Thanks, Admiral, and thank you, Felix, for having me here.
Yeah, we know each other a couple of years, and it's nice that we keep in touch. It's always nice seeing you in field work. I think we were briefly met during online COP for 21, and we actually met at the Rotary Convention in Singapore. So we keep on meeting each other, and I thought it's time that we invite you to our podcast as a guest.
Thank you.
Mina is quite passionate about the environment. She's been hand-holding me a lot, especially in ESRAG, to understand and also to engage and also to know how to be able to ensure that projects that are being identified have a greater impact in communities and societies. And so tonight's session will definitely be a rich one that you want to come back and listen to. She has so much to tell, so much to give. Her passion pretty much is almost tangible. I can jump into the first question that I have for her. Mina, you've had such a remarkable journey from academia to ecology to Rotary. Can you tell us how you found your way to Rotary and what inspired you to join?
I moved into Ooty, which is in the Nilgiris in India and South India. It's a biosphere reserve. So the Rotary clubs here kind of work with what is around, and people here are more attuned with the land. And when I joined the Rotary Club, the idea of a Rotary Club for someone who comes from outside is like, it's quite being very separate. But being a small town and having people very passionate advocates for what's happening around them, it was interesting because when you see other Rotary clubs and when they look at environment, everything is very different. Okay, we're doing a project on environment stands separately, but here it's almost like when you're talking about health, environment comes in, you're doing water projects, and this thing looking at cleaning up a water body or something like that, but you're not thinking about it as an environmental project or a health project. You're just thinking about it as a community project. That's what makes people, at least here where I live, in for a Rotary club, we are more into working with the community without seeing it as something different. That's what first got me really excited about joining the club that I was invited to, because a lot of work that is being done is like quite seamless, and my background being as a population ecologist, basically also working also with farmers. This was great because it could bring in my passion, and I didn't see the Rotary Club being anything more than a giant fellowship on doing things what I was interested in.
And that was your first interaction with Rotary, or you had interaction with Rotary before?
Actually, yes. In my undergraduate year, I wasn't Rotarian or a Rotractor, but we had funds when we used to work with the olive ridley turtles. So we got a couple of funding from Rotary clubs to set up our hatcheries. This was in Madras, which is now called Chennai, along the east coast of India, where we had a students' sea turtle conservation network, which still goes strong now in its 40th year. So that was my first introduction to Rotary. And at that time, you saw Rotary as business people helping for projects. Never thought I would find myself as being a Rotarian and being a passionate environmentalist and having a club that has got most of its work doing environmental work.
It just became almost normal for you just to kind of continue. And also, it was easier for you to see where the linkage is in terms of Rotary and community and your passion.
That's a very long story. So you've been kind of with on and off with Rotary for many, many years, actually. Then you came to Rotary and you have such a strong background in ecology and community work. So what led you to join ESRAG and focus on environmental sustainability within Rotary?
It was in 2008, 17, 18 when I went in for my president elect training seminar, and there was a session on fellowships and Rotary action groups. My curiosity being what it was, I went onto the Rotary site and then I found about ESRAG and I decided to join. Once I joined, I found myself in the then South Asia chapter, which was being run out of Bangladesh, which had a couple of founders on it. But internet being what it was in Bangladesh, I really couldn't connect with them to find out what was happening in India and other places and what was going on. So I just contacted the main ESRAG saying that, see, I'm a member from India and I want to know what's happening, and I don't get any response because I don't know what's happening. And it was just at that time in 2018 that ESRAG was creating chapters, and we had Steve Solbrack. And he was like, why don't you just start the South Asia chapter for India and these countries? And here are a few people who came in for the Hamburg RICON and they joined ESRAG and they're from India. Why don't you connect with them and see where it can go? And that's what I did. And we started off with about 6 members. And then we were like, okay, let's see how many other people whom we know that we can bring in. And that's how the chapter grew. One of our first meetings that we decided to do was kind of attend one of the zone institutes that was happening. And we met there and we talked to people around and we got a few more members in and we said, okay, we need to figure out if we can, at least the few projects that we hear about, let's start promoting that. And one of them said, okay, I can do a social media thing on Facebook. They decided to do that. And we started hearing from some other Rotary clubs. Meanwhile, a couple of them whom said, okay, you live close to where we live, let's meet. And we decided to go to see a forest where there was some restoration work to be done. And from where I live, 2 other people decided to come also and join us. And there were 8 of us who met that day. And we were like, it'd be nice if we could collate what these projects are and see what are the projects that are being done. That was the beginning of how iRotary also came to be, coming into place in saying that, we should just have like an app or something. People can just put a project in and say this is what is done, because today it's the day of apps. No one is looking at an Excel sheet or who's collecting or this.
Going to Facebook and looking up for projects.
Exactly. One of the people who had come in, he said, okay, let me put some money in and let's just figure out how can we make this an app. 3 months down the line, we had the beginning of an app. We put in about 2 or 3 projects in, and it was basically just tree projects because tree planting was there. We didn't have a name for it. Then we said it has to rhyme with Rotary, otherwise no Rotarians will know. Though it was tree projects, it was iRotary to kind of sound like Rotary, and that domain was up. So for putting the app in, we got in, and that's how iRotary was born. We started putting in projects. We had projects come in to us initially, which were tree planting, then a couple of butterfly parks before we knew about the pollinator task force or Operation Pollination. So that's how the South Asia chapter grew.
Wow, that's interesting. And I'm glad you mentioned concerning the iRotary. That has been my focus, especially in the last 1 month, engaging clubs in District 9212, 9213, who have a centennial project. And centennial project, what it is they're celebrating 100 years of Rotary in Africa. And so for that, everybody is supposed to plant their balance. And the balance stands for you minus your age from 100, and that's the number of trees you're supposed to grow, or rather to nurture. It's been quite interesting using the app, interacting with the app. And definitely, I know it's still a work in progress. As you mentioned, there's still a room to be able to include other forms of carbon sequestration programs or projects. But so far, it's fantastic. And I encourage all that are yet to use an app to be able to provide traceability for them growing their trees, to try out iRotary. It's a simple app, easy to use, and you'll find it quite interesting. I remember when I met you, you had a big passion concerning invasive species. And I remember that was one of the big projects that pretty much was something that you're running passionately. And so I'd like to ask you, as the chair, that is the chair of projects for ESRAG, you play a key role in guiding initiatives. Can you share with us what your role entails and how you help Rotarians leverage global grants for environmental projects?
I see myself as the role as like a nodal person, guiding people to projects, if they do ask, would be impactful to either what the ESRAG task forces are doing or if they have ideas. Most of it comes through our website, through the general email, this thing that comes through. The other main focus of the projects division has been also looking for ways to give grants. This year, we have money to give grants for projects that are sustainable, impactful, and can be replicated. Okay, so it's open to all Rotarians, and we are asking people to put in their projects. Either they send it to projects@esrag.org, or preferably, we are looking for projects that are at least entered in iRotary, because one way is for us to track it. And for people who do not know how to find where iRotary is, it is www.esrag.org/iRotary. You'll find it there. We have about between 12 projects for Rotarians and another 8 projects for Rotractors that can be funded, and more funding can be found if there are more projects that come in. The other thing that we are working through, especially in Eastern North America chapter and hoping to replicate it across the world, is looking at project fair, where the chapter members and other Rotarians can come together and show their projects they're working on. It was very successful last year, and in Eastern North America, and they're trying it out this year too. Carolyn DeWitt is running it out for the Eastern North America chapter, and we hope that we will be able to try in other chapters depending on enthusiasm and also the amount of distances covered that people have to do, or maybe could try having it virtually. iRotary is one of the other focus areas where we are looking at project impact reporting. People may ask, why are you going on and on about this app, and why do we need the data? One of the things is a club can drive a project, but we do not know what the sustainability of that project is, where it is after 2 or 3 years. By having it in one place, it helps. Now, people may say, why not just put it on the service project center in Rotary? Please do that as well. The difference between that and iRotary is here we look at specific values that can be used for looking at how impactful your project has been environmentally. If you're looking at cleanups like what has been done around the world, how has the water quality changed? How many people are working? How much funds you got? And we can even look at if it is just an advocacy, how did you reach? So some of the intangibles, like in terms of what kind of media you used and, how many people you reached, all those things can be also recorded on iRotary. Global grants is a big part of what the projects division does. We have the contacts of about 34 CARDA members, and within the ESRAG community, and at the, say, the part where we work with global grants, for all the 10 major portions of the area of focus of environment, we have CARDA members. We help in hand-holding a lot of projects. Most of the projects that we have got so far have been conservation based. They have been projects on coral reefs, a few projects on mangroves, projects on the currently interesting one we've got is actually setting up a way to save 5 turtle species that come to breed in Sri Lanka. Mangrove projects have come in through. And interestingly, as you guys have been talking about Jakarta and mangroves, let me tell you, we also got one request that asking for a separate Rotary action group to be set up for mangroves coming from Indonesia, because clubs there plant between 40,000 to 50,000 saplings by themselves, especially around Jakarta and going to Borneo. So they wanted to start a separate Rotary action group, but they are looking to join ESRAG and create a separate task force now. I don't know how long that will take, but it will be happening. The thing that is interesting is Rotarians in Jakarta and other parts of Indonesia have been doing such a huge work. And to know that now with a new city coming up, these mangroves are going to be removed. And when people talk about bringing in the jungle, so as to speak, in urban setting, most people think only of large mammals and things like that, but they forget most of it is going to be smaller insects, and these are our pollinators. What is happening with our agriculture, and as Felix also knows, as farms get larger, going in from small holdings, the use of fertilizer and pesticide is so high. It's ironic that the largest number of pollinators that we find are in the urban landscape. That's another interesting part.
But you also have people who will use things against insects. They will use chemicals to get rid of those insects. They will be living in the city, within tropical city, but then they will use all kinds of chemicals to get rid of the insects. They'll be like, oh, I don't want this.
Yeah, you don't want this, you don't want this thing, but it's the strangest situation is there's never been a huge sampling or scientific studies done, but a few of the urban studies that have been done looking at insects, especially in the urban context when compared to a rural context in Europe and a few areas in the United States, has found that the density of pollinators is actually higher in cities because people have ornamentals growing. So that's the interesting part. Global grants is a big part of what we do. It is a daunting task right now because the matching grants that come in from the foundation have dropped to 80%. And we also help in finding partners. And I'd like to put it out there that we are there to help, and please bring in your projects.
At any stage?
At any stage. Right now, I'm working from the get go. How do you even frame your questions? If you have just an amorphous question of how to do something, there is this project that's come out of the USA where they work out of the Great Salt Lake and other salt lakes in South America, that they have students who work on them in their own areas, and they now want to make it into a bigger program, and they want to make that as a global grant. So, right from concept note of 500 words, we're going to go to a global grant, to a project that came completely funded. I'm just helping them put the papers together and get the MOUs done.
Thanks, Mina. I think anyone interested should send an email or contact ESRAG and find more and have more environmental projects around the world. So we spoke a bit about mangroves just a bit before, and it's a returning topic. I guess it's a hot topic, hot item around the world, such as mangrove restoration. Mangrove restoration is often highlighted as crucial for combating climate change. Why do you think mangrove projects are so important? Why should Rotary prioritize more of these projects? What impact have you seen from this effort so far?
People talk about mangrove restoration. It's just not the saplings that count, because coming with it is advocacy, and most importantly is community economic development, because people who live in the mangrove areas really lack any other source of income. So cutting the mangroves helps in sale of firewood and things like that. So you improve community economic development, you improve the health of mangroves. And this is where Rotary comes in, because we work at the community level. And Rotary has an interesting concept called as Rotary Community Corps, which are people who are locally involved. And if Rotary clubs can harness a Rotary Community Corps and set up community economic development projects, mangroves survive very well there. This has been seen in two projects that went through global grants through India. One is in the Sundarbans, which is one of the largest mangrove complexes, where what they're doing is working with the forest department in improving the community economic development by creating apiaries. The apiaries and the bee boxes are given actually to the widows of men who died through tiger attacks, are going to collect honey. And this is a forest department program. So one thing that Rotary does very well, other than community economic development, is we are able to bring in partners. And by working with government officials, it makes the program more sustainable. So one is this with the bee boxes and widows, giving them an alternative livelihood. And the second part of it is not just growing mangrove species, which are on the front end, which everyone sees this extending out to the sea. But what people don't understand with mangrove populations is that there's something called as a zonation. So you have mangroves that can deal with high salinity right in the forefront, and as it grows inward, that the salinity reduces. But things have changed with climate change, in that with frequent storms, the salinity has been increasing inward, so the zonation has changed. So you have to address that and what you're going to grow there, which would increase, spaces for fish nurseries, for crabs, and as well provide some kind of, fruit, or just even bund strengthening as you go inward from the estuaries. And in both projects, both in India, in Sundarbans, and the other one in South India, zonation has been one of the things, and they have been trying to grow other species.
What are we talking about here? How long does mangrove take to grow?
Mangrove is not one species. There are more than 80 species around the world.
Let's say I want to plant mangrove trees, and we say, okay, one of the 80, because you plant it will take many years before it's useful, right? It's not right away. There it goes.
Most of the mangrove species have seeds that drop into the ground, and they immediately germinate. But the thing is, those things that fall into the ground and germinate have also an ability of not being able to hold on to currents and go out. So when you see these huge plant efforts, especially of rhizophora, these are the seeds which are look tubular. You would see people in Philippines, going for these Guinness World Records saying they've planted about 500,000 to a million seeds. But within 3 months, 90% of that is gone because these don't hold. So the best thing is to have a nursery to grow these for at least 6 to 9 months so that they attain a height of at least 1 feet before you put them out. And there's some growth of the roots. When you talk of species which are in the forefront, these are what you do. The ones in the back, they can be palms, they can be other species, and they're also smaller species which grow not more than 2 to 3 inches or 4 inches on the ground. These are all important. So there are all kinds of species, and you can't just say, is it going to take 1 year or this thing? I would say in an average between 6 months going up to 3 to 4 years.
So it seems that mangroves do encourage the growth of others in terms of biodiversity. Seems like it's feeding others.
These are nurseries for fishes, these are nurseries for crabs, and these can provide livelihood for the people. They have been doing these crab collection. People who live there know that they can get these species there, and this augments their livelihood. But what is happening is the same area that you're talking about mangroves, and as you're talking about in Jakarta, that they're going to cut the mangroves, these can be easily also, once this cut, people just pile in what you call rubble and other things and make this real estate. This can also be made into land. But what happens is, for you to protect these mangroves, if you increase the way the crabs can be fattened very quickly in the mangrove area, you increase the amount that the people who live there make out of crab collection or shrimp collection, shrimps. They come in, and then fish nurseries are there. These increase the economy of the people. And once they see that the mangroves are useful for other things throughout the year that they can do, they are more reluctant to let anyone cut them.
It's almost like a one bullet solution or a silver bullet solution seems to be as far as ecosystems are concerned.
It is one of the fragile ones, and people who live there live a very tough life. Anything that we can augment in terms of community economic development there works. Rotary works very well that way because if you see in mangrove areas, Rotary comes in first with health. In a lot of areas where mangroves are, we already have mobile clinics and things like that. So we have a very good way of being there as a good way to protect the mangroves. It is only lately that Rotarians have realized that we can do this to improve the mangroves. The problem is that we need champions for this. And just taking 1 hectare or 2 hectares doesn't work. We have to work with the governments. We have to work with the local NGOs and see that can kind of make it into a larger hectareage that we can plant in. There has been a lot of talk in Rotary about it, and people should also understand that mangroves grow only in the equatorial belt between the Tropic of Cancer to the Tropic of Capricorn. It's not available everywhere. We have also, once the mangrove question came, we have had questions that can we plant mangroves in London? So, yes.
That's interesting. This plays out to the next question I have. You've authored field guides on insects and arachnids and have a passion for citizen science. How does your background in these fields influence your work with Rotary and ESRAG today?
Biodiversity doesn't kind of ignite a lot of passion in Rotarians. We are interested in seeing that you put something up, say solar panels, or do something like a cleanup. People would look at trees, but people they don't find an aha moment. It takes a little time, and that's where citizen science comes in. By asking a question, what did you have for breakfast? And someone says, I had almonds. And I said, okay, where do your almonds come from? Let's take an example. Someone says it comes from California. And I said, do you know that there are not that many bees that pollinate? They bring in from Florida, bees come into California. And the almond trees in California are getting the water table done. And that's an aha moment, realizing it's the bees that pollinate, that create the almond. And the almond trees are getting your water table down. But you want the almonds because it's good for your health. See? And that's biodiversity.
Wow, quite interesting. It's the same thing Admiral saying that a lot of research needs to be done. I'm guessing a lot of advocacy also needs to be emphasized upon, especially in the education system. There seems to be a gap in terms of what knowledge people have through the school systems. What would be your take on this one?
Basically, we have forgotten how to see things around us. When we talk about advocacy, supposing you're going to say that you have sewage coming into a water body, you're ready to immediately go for a sewage treatment plant rather than wonder why the sewage is going there in the first place. When you think of advocacy, we have to first ask ourselves, what am I doing at my level? And that's the most difficult question for most people to ask of ourselves, because we are ready to look at a bigger solution rather than the change within us that we might have to do for it. When we look at plastic, it's easy to say, I don't use plastic, I use a bag, I go and do this. But at the same time, I'd rather take the car to drive 5 minutes to reach my shopping area rather than do the walk. For that advocacy to come in, it has to start with us. And I think as Rotarians, we should start with us. And I think this Every Club climate friendly program that we have started with is a good place to start. Start talking within us first before we even take it to the community.
And just one quick one, because I remember when I met you, the passion for invasive species, which are pretty much destroying a lot of the natural biodiversity we have in our communities. What would be your take on that one, or what you're thinking around that on invasive species?
It is one that has to be dealt with great effort and immediacy, but this is a work that requires multiple cogs to work in unison, because when we say something is in nature and we need to take it out, the first question that is asked is, other than how much it's going to cost us, is what can we get from it? We have to stop looking at nature being providing the economic benefit from something. So if you're going to look at invasive species, it is not what we can convert that invasive species into, because the minute economics comes into it in terms of benefit, the cycle will never be broken, because you're going to see it as a resource, not as something that has to be brought down. And that's where advocacy again comes in. And for most of the invasive species, it's not something that can be mechanically removed. It has to be physically removed. With all the problems that we have, this is a huge issue that requires multiple bodies to work with. So it's kind of being worked on in different spaces, but there's still not a lot of funding for it, because unless we see something giving back something to us, we are not interested in looking at it economically.
Thanks so much today, Mina. It was very useful to have you as a guest. I've learned quite a few things. I think I knew a few things, but inside of all things, in the face of climate crisis worldwide, how do you stay positive and how do you continue work?
Turn off your taps when you brush your teeth.
In the face of climate crisis, turn off your tap when you brush your teeth.
In a sense that turn off whatever is, you have to look at your consumption, is basically what I'm coming to say, is like whatever, whether it is for your entertainment using the internet, or whether you're using electricity, or how you eat food, or whatever you do, look at your consumption pattern first. If you can come to reducing anything out of it, you are helping in mitigating the climate crisis one way or the other.
Thanks so much, Mina. I think we're getting wise after this. Felix, you going to do what Mina told you?
Oh, yes, I've learned a lot, and I definitely will follow her guide as she knows best. She recently received some certification for ESG, and I don't think I can argue with Dr. Mina on some of those issues. So, whatever she recommends, I go for it. And one of my quick take was on citizen science, the role it plays, especially. Because as she mentioned, people think of big solutions, people don't think of the little activities they do now and then, which contribute to the larger picture. So there's much that I've learned, and there's much I'm sure our listeners have also learned, and they will be able to relate to what immediate actions they themselves can be able to engage in, at least to be able to sequester as much carbon as possible, creating a better environment, especially for all.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Mina. The researchers have found that self-medicating gorillas may hold new drug clues. What they found is that they know which plants to pick when they're sick. The researchers in Gabon have found that they can heal the wounds with specific plants. And if you follow the great apes, you can see, okay, these plants are good for healing properties. From 4 plants that has been picked, 2 of them have been actively against the strain of E. coli. So that's great news in hindsight of like looking around the world where we live in more and more bacterial resistant world. And it's a good news. And it's also another example of why we should not intervene with the wildlife and leave jungle to itself. We can take something from jungle, but we need to let jungle be. I think this is a great example. And I think it shows how great apes are so advanced in such things.
It's quite interesting how nature takes care of itself. That's a big lesson to be able to learn, that they themselves, they know what is medicinal. Implication is then we need to be able to kind of study them. Why not attach a camera to them, follow them around, see what they consume for what purpose? And it seems nature itself has a way of taking care of itself. That's quite an interesting take, or rather research and observation of how nature takes care of itself. And that showcases why it's good to be able to preserve nature, preserve wildlife. As we had mentioned last week, or rather in the last episode we had, the government of Namibia killing and destroying wildlife just to feed the people. Then there's an imbalance they are causing. There's learning they're taking away for us to be able to know, because we too ourselves have something to learn from the animals. As much as we may think that we know it all, they do also know something we can learn from them.
So is there anything interesting that you have seen or read, Felix?
Yes, on my side, it was interesting to observe in South Africa, they're actually melting plastics and building roads, that is, roads where vehicles run on using plastic. The thinking behind this is that it's easier to maintain, considering that much of the road damage is caused by water, and plastic basically is not affected by water. So that was an interesting observation, that they are melting plastic bags, plastic bottles, mixing with asphalt in order to be able to create roads. I see the economic aspect of it, as the big talk has been about microplastics. I don't know if it has a direct impact, considering that now you're also dealing with melted plastic, but that was quite an observation for me.
From there, you have microplastics. So I'm not sure. I guess it's a good solution for now, but long-term solution, it seems very not eco-friendly. You know, if you put this asphalt in the wild, plastic will dissolve in nanoplastic and eventually.
Exactly. It's one of those issues you don't know if it's the good or it's the bad, which outweighs the other. Looking at it from a long-term perspective. Right now, they're looking at the big story about getting rid of plastic, and they saw that as one of the solutions for them to incorporate. I'm guessing in the future, a lot of maybe the solutions we'll be seeking will be concerning health much more than the plastics at the moment. One way or the other, a solution has to be found. we hope that the plastics themselves, we can find a way that the microplastics do not get into our systems. That is our body systems.
All right. That is a good note to end this episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you, Felix, for hosting today.
It's been nothing but a pleasure to be here. It's been a great joy to be able to listen to Mina. There's a lot we've learned from her, and there's a lot ESRAG has to give, especially to Rotary clubs. She's mentioned about projects. She's mentioned about global grants. She's mentioned about putting emphasis, especially on the mangroves, and how much of a silver bullet it is to communities that are able, or rather that pretty much have mangrove as enabled in their biodiversity. So there's a lot that has been shared tonight, and it's my hope that the listeners will be able to integrate some of this knowledge, especially in their projects.
Great. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of ESRAG Podcast. We hope you found our conversation inspiring and informative as we continue to explore new ways to address environmental challenges we face. And once again, a big thank you to our guest, Dr. Mina, for sharing her insight and experiences. This podcast was produced, edited, and researched by me, Admiral, with my co-host, Felix. Special thanks to Lori Zuckerman and the ESRAG for making this podcast possible. It is made for Environmental Sustainability Rotary Action Group, ESRAG, to help Rotarians, communities worldwide, create a sustainable future. Until next time, keep striving for a greener and healthier planet.